A CNBC study came out last weekend showing that housing costs are the number one political issue for young voters heading to midterm elections in November. I want to say something about that before we get into all of this week's data. I'm not surprised, and I don't think you should be either. We have been watching this build all year long. The war tax, the confidence tax, the housing bill that took 30 years to materialize, the institutional investors that everyone blames for all of the problems, the rate spike, the inventory crisis, the millennial generation quietly splitting in half over one single fault line, whether or not you own a home. Housing has been a politicized nightmare all of 2026. And what I want to talk about today is what all of that noise actually means for my clients sitting at their kitchen table trying to figure out their next best step. I'm noticing that some people have been waiting for the political system to solve this problem for them, waiting for the Fed to cut interest rates, waiting for a housing bill to reform the inventory situation, waiting for institutional investors to be banned, waiting for inventory to flood into the market, waiting for Washington to make them feel safe before they buy a home. And in the meantime, other people have gone ahead and made a personal decision. They've stopped waiting for the macro to cooperate and started working with what existed in front of them. They looked at their own income, their savings, their job stability, and the next major milestone coming up in their own life. And they decided that their personal economy was strong enough to move, even if the national or global economy felt uncertain. Because with what other purchases in your life are you considering what's happening overseas? What other major decision are you stopping and checking Trump's Truth Social feed before you make? I'm going to go ahead and assume you typically check your own bank balances and consider your own personal life events and then make or don't make the financial move. It's only housing that we complicate like this. And the data confirmed that this week across multiple fronts. Mortgage applications were up 7.8% this week compared to for the week ending July 10th compared to last year. Buyer demand has stayed strong mostly because housing inventory still hasn't caught up with demand. And new home sales data came out this morning. I'll get to those in a second. But the directional story was already clear. Some buyers are moving, not all, but some, because they are focused on what they can actually control rather than the headlines and the noise out there. The most surprising real estate development this week was a direct result of the legislation that we've been following since March. Institutional investors' home listings have gone from 4,100 in February to almost 9,500 homes for sale this month. So they more than doubled. The 7 largest corporate landlords are all net sellers year to date, with 3,100 more homes sold than bought since the beginning of the year. The corporations that spent years outbidding individual buyers, the mom and pops out there with cash offers, are now starting to sell what they hold. Not because they want to, because the law doesn't require them to sell. It only requires them to stop buying. But when you can no longer grow a portfolio, the calculations on holding it change too, right? So I do want to be honest about what this is and what it isn't. The law doesn't exclude institutions from the housing market. It just creates guidelines, but there's still enough room to allow institutions to remain active. The wiggle room is very real here. Build to rent is still permitted. Significant renovations are exceptions to the entire rule. So it's not a complete corporate exit from the housing market. It is a little more inventory. Kind of. For the buyers who have been competing against a faceless LLC with an algorithmic offer and no contingencies, no emotions in the situation, there's now 9,447 more homes on the market. Is that nothing? Or when you consider the whole country, is it nothing? Anyways, new Fed research published this week confirmed something that has been building for years, and I think explains a lot of the generational rage in my comments on social media. The millennial generation is split. Older millennials over 35 are edging towards boomer-style wealth. Younger millennials under 35 are falling further and further behind. Here's the numbers. Older millennials, the highest earning buyer segment in the market right now, are posting a median household income of $132,700 and increasingly functioning as repeat move-up equity leveraging buyers. Only 22% of adults under 35 are even homeowners. Millennials' total net worth has quadrupled since 2019, from 3.94 trillion to 15.95 trillion. That sounds like good news, right? But the average is being pulled up by the older half of the generation that got into housing before 2022 and then rode the appreciation wave. The median under 35 millennials' net worth is $39,000. The median over 35 millennials' net worth is $135,600. Same generation, 3.5 times the net worth, 3.5 times as much wealth. One variable more than any other explains the difference: whether or not they own a home. Maybe, just maybe, it isn't boomers that are hogging all the monies. Boomers didn't design a market that ran up prices 37% in 2 years while simultaneously raising interest rates from 3 to almost 8%. That was a pandemic, a supply chain shock, a war, and a Federal Reserve response that nobody could really figure out. The fault line isn't generational here. It's not millennials versus boomers. It's actually temporal. Did you get in before 2022 or after? That question, more than your politics, your parents, or your generation, is what determined where you sit on the wealth divide today. That's crazy to think about from inside the industry. 124 trillion wealth transfer from boomers to younger generations begins in just a few years in 2028. Which half of the millennial generation will take advantage of that transfer and how will they use it? We'll see. It remains to be seen, but it's an interesting idea to consider. Then the data I said I'd come back to, new home sales came out this morning at 10 a.m. Eastern. Sales were down 5.6% year over year, but what got my attention is the median new home price fell even further to $393,300. When May numbers came out, they showed that new builds were now costing less than resales, and that surprised me. So for them to drop another $42,000 in June is something to pay attention to. The report says builders on average are offering a 6% price cut, and 63% of builders nationwide are offering incentives. Builders need to move inventory, it seems. What does this all mean for the person watching this video, for the realtor trying to advise their clients, for the client trying to figure out their next best step? The political conversation about housing is the loudest it has been in a generation, and I think it will get louder this fall as we head into midterm elections. But here's the thing about political conversations: they operate on a timeline that has nothing to do with your life. Bills take years, so does inventory creation. Rate cuts take quarters. Inventory, in general, to solve this problem will take decades. Your personal economy operates on your own timeline. The buyers and the sellers who are winning right now did not wait for Washington to solve their problems. They did not wait for the Fed to cut interest rates because they didn't. They did not wait for corporate landlords to be fully purged from the market because they never will be, or for the housing bill to produce its first unit of new supply because that will take time. They looked at their income, they looked at their savings, their job, their family, and they made a decision based on their own economic reality. The political system will keep fighting about housing because it gets attention and it activates voters. The fight is important. It's worth having. I'm not saying it's not. But the politics will not buy you a home. Only you can do that.